Really nice to see quite a few of you on the line. I love seeing people's faces, so thanks to those who have their cameras on. It's really nice for me to see who I'm talking to. Good morning. My name is Stacey DeCalmer and I manage sector development at QCOS, or the Queensland Council of Social Service. So good morning to all of you on the line. We've got quite a few organisations joining us today. We also have some of our departmental colleagues from the Department of Youth Justice, Employment, Small Business and Training, including some of our PIPOs on the line. So good morning and welcome to all of you. Now, some of you may have joined us in the regions for some of our regional workshops, but today's workshop is an opportunity to recap some of the content that we covered in the regional workshops, but of course a great opportunity for anyone who just wasn't able to join us for some of those face-to-face workshops across the state. So welcome to all of you. I assume we're going to have a few, you might hear those little beeps that pop up. That's when people join us in the room, and I'll keep an eye on our attendance list and let those people in as they come in. Okay. Hopefully you can all see my screen. You can see my presentation okay? Yeah, excellent. Okay. Let me just bring up that. Okay, excellent. Now, really happy for this to be as participatory as you like, to take yourself off mute, to ask a question, to pause me if anything is unclear, if you want to ask a question or even just add your own comment about it. So please feel free to I know it's very different from being in a room together, but let's try and make it as much like that as we possibly can. And yeah, we'll try and ensure it's as conversational as we can make it. But of course, if you're not comfortable taking yourself off mute, or if you don't have a microphone that's working, you can also use the chat function, and I'll try and keep an eye on that as we go along. Okay. Now, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Yugambeh speaking nation on the south side of Brisbane. This is where I live and where I raise my family. So I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present, and acknowledging their continuing connection to this place and the vibrant and rich culture that they bring to my community where I live. I'd also like to acknowledge the Dirrumbal people in central Queensland. It was on their land that I was born and raised and did a lot of my learning through life. So I'd like to acknowledge their elders past and present too, and again, thanking them for their continuing care of that land in that place. And I invite all of you to acknowledge the land that you're on and share the different places from across Queensland where you're joining from. Just letting a couple more people in. It's really nice to have so many people joining us this morning, so welcome. So I'm just going to pop a couple of people on mute. Sorry, it feels very unnatural muting people. It's just so that we don't get that background noise. Okay. So if you'd like to, would love for you to share in the chat your name, your organisation, the country you're on, and anything that you'd like to learn from today's workshop. Why have you joined today's webinar, and what are you hoping to learn? Would love to see some of your responses. And if the PIPOs would like to introduce themselves too, that would be great. Because for any organisations that are looking to apply for this particular funding, the PIPOs they are your friends in this process. You really want to get familiar with your regional PIPO. Thanks, Sharon. I love your background, Sharon. You look like you're really out of this world. And Trin, you might like to introduce yourself too.
Hi, I was typing a message, but
oh, you were.
That's all right. My name is Trin Huang. I'm from the Training and Skills Pathways team from the Department of Youth Justice, Employment, Small Business and Training. I'm currently the program manager looking after the IWSDG grant program. So I'm just here to provide any support as needed.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Trin.
No
Good morning,
worries.
Cassie. Hi, Penny. Hi.
Good morning, all. Cassie Jackson here, Principal Indigenous Program Officer. I'm sitting here in Gimwood today in Cairns. Much respect to the people of this country, elders past, present and emerging. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Cassie. Hi, Chelsea.
Morning, everybody. Oh, good morning, everybody. Chelsea Lucas from Darling Downs Southwest. I'm a pipo just like Cassie, and I am working here on Gaibal Jarwa and connections to Waka Waka land.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. And I heard the Dolby workshop went well yesterday.
Yes, it did. Sarah did a fantastic job with presenting that, and it was really, really great. And I think everyone that attended really walked away with some great tips and some learning curves about grant writing and particularly the ISWSD grant.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and we had a great time on Monday in Strathpine. Thanks so much, Glenda, Natasha, Amanda, and Penny. Hi, Mark. Welcome. Everyone's just introducing themselves in the chat at the moment, sharing where we're from and what we're hoping to learn from the workshop today.
You want me to go?
Sure, that would be great.
Right. Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
Well, get yourself settled if you like.
My name's Mark Harbrier. Harbrier Mentoring's our company. Myself and my brother on the Gold Coast coordinate and co-founded and direct. And yeah, we now have a not-for-profit, and so we're learning as much as we can about grant writing and all these sorts of workshops.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much, Mark. I think you're in the right spot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline, as well for sharing a bit about yourself and what you're doing. I would love for people to continue contributing to the chat, introducing themselves. I might, unless there was anyone else who would like to do that via their mic, I might go on to the next slide if that's okay. Right, okay. But please keep continuing to add to the chat. Now, many of you here, I think, for general grant writing tips, but also to talk specifically about the funding opportunity that's available at the moment. So we'll be talking about that funding opportunity and grant writing in general today, and lots of resources available to you to ensure that you're best placed to take advantage of the funding that's currently available, but really put you in a great space as well as an organisation to take up other opportunities that come your way. So QCOST is the peak body for community services in Queensland, and that's we've been working with the Department of Youth Justice and Employment, Small Business and Training for many years now, providing grant writing workshops attached to different funding opportunities. So this one today is the Indigenous Workforce Skills Development Grant that we'll be talking about. It's been a real pleasure for us to work closely with the PIPOs across the state as well as head office to put together this workshop, this content. Now, before I get into the rest of the content, I just wanted to assure you that you will receive an email from us after the session with the slides, with any of the resources that we talk about, as well as some links to some of the videos. Because we don't want to keep you online for too long, there's a couple of things I've just taken out of the webinar, so I'm not keeping you in front of a screen for too long, but we'll make sure we put all of that into the email that you get, and you'll be able to go over that as many times as you like. And of course, there is also the people that you'll be able to make contact with afterwards to talk about this funding opportunity. So we know that the Grants in Australia research that was done back in 2018, which is a little while ago now, but the results are still valid, that grants make up about $80 billion of the Australian economy. And today's workshop really is about ensuring that your organisation gets a piece of that. So ensuring that the sustainability of your organisation is cared for, and that you have all the information that you need to ensure you're able to take up some of those funding opportunities. Now, the content today is focused on providing tips for community-based organisations to write grant applications, and the example that we will use is the Indigenous Workforce and Skills Development Grant. So we'll talk about, is the fund right for you? Because that might be a question that you're asking at the moment, whether or not you're eligible as an organisation. And that is a really important question for your organisation to ask, regardless of what funding opportunity you are considering. Eligibility is a really important thing to be able to determine early on in your process. We'll talk about making a plan to apply for the fund, and we'll provide you with some tips and tricks for writing your application. So we'll talk about the assessment criteria, what supporting documents you might need, and any other content that you might need for including your budget. Just going to make sure that person that just entered is in. Yep, great. Okay. So what is the Indigenous Workforce and Skills Development Grant? And there are many people online at the moment who are far better placed to answer this question than I am, but I'll do my best, and you can all pitch in when you would like to make further comment. So the Indigenous Workforce and Skills Development Grant is a key action and focus area under the Paving the Way strategy. And some of you might be familiar with that particular strategy. It's designed to fund Indigenous designed and led projects that support or respond to local training and workforce needs. So Paving the Way is the Queensland Government's plan to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's skills development and respond to local and community employment needs. And I'm hoping that you have heard of that strategy. Now, the Indigenous Workforce and Skills Development Grant Program recognises that skills and training for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples will be more successful when solutions are designed and developed locally and supported by the community. And I think we all know that place-based solutions work really well. Now, the next round opened on the 13th of November, and it will close on the 22nd of February. So that's a really important date for you to note if this is a funding opportunity you would like to apply for. It's really important that you check the webpage on the opening date. So this might be a funding round that you're looking at in the future, making sure that you're looking at the most current and updated version of the funding guidelines and the associated documents for the funding round. So new updates were provided on the 13th of November when the funding opened. So if you do have any old documents or funding guidelines from the previous round, just making sure that you're referring to the most up-to-date version that's currently on the website. Any questions about that before I move on? Any questions about the funding itself? And anything anyone wanted to add? Okay. So what is the department looking for in your application? They're looking to fund Indigenous organisations to deliver local projects that have a focus on supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people into employment while addressing a local training or workforce concern for the community. Now, it's really important to note that the intent of this program is not to provide direct funding to individual Indigenous businesses to assist with expenses relating to the core business activities such as operating costs, recruitment costs, staff attraction, wages, staff training, or business development within your own organisation. So I think the key message here really is that this isn't about a cash injection to a business that's already operating. It's not to fund something that's already happening. It really is about adding value to the community through intentional workforce strategies. So applicants must be able to demonstrate that they have a local presence, including well-established community and employer relationships. And you must have partnership arrangements between eligible organisations that are strongly, it's not a must that you have those, but they're strongly encouraged, partnership arrangements between eligible organisations. They do often benefit a program like this, lots of connection and collaboration and using your different organisational strengths together to deliver a really strong program. So partnerships are encouraged. Now, the program specifically targets Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are seeking local training and employment opportunities. So Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples may also be indirectly assisted with local Indigenous and non-Indigenous employers being supported to create culturally safe and responsive workplaces. So that is another aspect of the program as well, of the kinds of programs that might be funded. Now, applicants must show that they have success in supporting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples into employment or are in the process of developing these links to build this experience. Now, eligibility is really important, as I've already mentioned. Whenever you're considering funding, trying to figure out right from the beginning whether or not your organisation is eligible will save you a lot of time in the long run. Sometimes organisations do spend some time developing ideas or crafting even their application, only to find out later on that they're not actually eligible for the funding. So I wouldn't want anyone to do that. So this is something to certainly pay attention to when you're considering funding. So applicant organisations eligible for funding must be an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander organisation, such as Indigenous councils, corporations, organisations and institutes, Indigenous community groups and neighbourhood centres, Indigenous social enterprises and not-for-profit organisations, Indigenous business groups and Chamber of Commerce. So eligible not-for-profit Indigenous organisations must be located in Queensland, an incorporated association or a public company limited by guarantee. They must be able to provide a company constitution or charitable constitution or governance documents, and they must be able to demonstrate that 50% of the board of directors are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent and have a current ABN. That's a bit of a list. Well, let me go back. Any questions about eligibility, because that is a really important one. The following entities are not eligible to apply. That is Indigenous businesses registered as an individual or sole trader and Indigenous businesses registered as partnerships. And a range of activities are supported under the grant. However, it's important that you check the guidelines to make sure your project is eligible. Just want to stop and check that that is really clear before I move on to the grant writing content itself. Any questions about that? Just catching up on the chat. Thanks, Grant and Jimmy. Grant, you said you're just looking to see if anything has changed since the last submission. Wondering if Trin or one of the Pippos would like to respond to that.
Hi, Grant and everyone else. Basically, there's a few small changes in there. I think we've just made updated the guidelines just to have a bit more clarity on some of the things that, what we're looking for in terms of the training program and what services you can provide. But overall, the intent of the program hasn't changed. So there's no, I can't really say that there's any major changes from when you last submitted, unless there's a particular service or something that you're asking me that you want to do. That might
No, not at all. More
Yeah.
about the submission process. I know we've got, use the online portal now, so that's all cool.
Yeah.
Instead of the paper-based
Yeah.
application from last time. So that's all good. And I've got another thing in the chat. It's just to test what the longevity of this fund source is. If there's been, you probably can't say too much, but if it looks like it's going to be an ongoing funding, strategy from government, or whether it's, we still don't know anything coming to the last application round for this particular funding source.
At the moment, we only know that we've got the 4 million up to 30 June 2025 over the 2 funding rounds. There hasn't been any further commitments for additional funding rounds under this strategy at the moment. Yeah.
Coolio. Thanks for that. I'll shut up now.
No worries. That's all good.
Thanks, Grant. Good questions. And usually I find when someone asks the question, there's probably someone else in the group that was wondering it too. So thank you. No silly questions here. Please feel free to ask anything. Okay. I'm going to go into the process of grant writing now, and I really hope that this content and these tips will assist you with all grant writing that you're doing as an organisation. I know from the conversations that we've been having across the state in the different regions that some of these tips have been really useful for organisations. Again, please stop if you want to clarify anything or ask a question, or even if you've got your own tips that you'd like to share with others. So this is how we suggest you could approach grant writing in quite a methodical way to ensure that by the time you get to the writing stage, you're really well prepared and your ideas are really clear in your own mind and in the mind of your colleagues or even any other organisations that you're partnering with to deliver this work or to even apply for this work. We would suggest taking this step-by-step approach, and I will walk through all of these steps. Now, you can see that there's quite a bit there before you actually get to the writing stage, and it can be really difficult to pause and not just dive into the process itself, particularly when you're excited about your idea. And I've certainly had this experience myself where you just kind of want to get it all down and get into the application process itself. But many funding opportunities these days, I find, have word limits. It's not often that you get a application process that doesn't have some kind of restriction on how much you can write. The assessors don't have infinite amount of hours to spend reading applications, I suppose, and so this is a way that they put some boundaries around how much you can write about your idea and your application. So it means that we need to be really careful about what we spend our word count on, because if you spend a lot of time writing about one aspect of your idea or your application, you might not do justice to the other aspects of the things that you need to write about for your application. So some of this prep work really helps with the writing itself, but also getting really clear about what your idea is, who your stakeholders are, and that can really assist in the conversations you have with any partner organisations as well. Now, there is a video here on the next slide, but what I'm going to do is actually send that to you via the post-event email for you to watch. I do recommend you watch it. It does talk about a funding opportunity in another state, so it's not about this funding opportunity, but it's just about how it can be really useful to create a timeline for your grant writing process. So in this video, and I'll give it to you to watch later, it talks about having the due date in your calendar and then working back from that. And we'll talk about that in the workshop as well. Okay, so the process for grant writing and step number one is really about mapping out your grant application before you start writing your response. And it might feel like extra work, but the prep time will save you time in the long run, as you'll be able to build a strong case for your final application and hopefully not have to do too much work editing in the end. So firstly, we're finding the right grant. And for many of you, you already know what you're applying for. You're here because you'd like to apply for the Indigenous Workforce and Skills Development Grant. So it's important to be sure that your project idea aligns with the funding purpose. The Indigenous Workforce Skills Development Grant Program recognises that skills and training for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples will be more successful when solutions are designed and developed locally and supported by the community. So the department are inviting you to share how your project idea will build strong pathways to employment and training for your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. For this funding, the applications must demonstrate that the applicant understands the purpose of this fund. So make sure you read the funding guidelines before you start your application. And it's really good to run any ideas past the funder to save yourself time and disappointment later. Now, I would say that that's the case for any funding that you're applying for, but a really valuable part of the whole application process for the Indigenous Workforce and Skills Development Grant is that the PIPOs are available to you to chat about your idea. There's even a draft project template that you can fill out and get feedback from them before you actually go down the whole process of putting your application together. Now, that's quite a unique support that's available, so I really encourage you to take that up. They will be able to, they're all really friendly. If you're not already familiar with the PIPO in your region, they are the experts on this particular funding opportunity, and both the department, the PIPOs, they're all really geared to ensuring that you're supported and successful in your application. So there's quite a few different mechanisms in place, including this workshop today, to ensure that you succeed in your application. So we'll include the link to that draft template in the post-event email. Have a look at it. Ensure that you get some feedback before you go through the rest of your application. But if you are applying for other types of funding, I do really recommend that you get in touch with the funder wherever that's possible. Sometimes they're not available to chat to on the phone. Sometimes it is an email address that's given, depending on who the funder is. But regardless, I would always recommend that you make contact with the funder and ensure that your idea does align with the funding. So here are some quotes from the department. They would really like to see locally designed and developed projects that create training and employment pathways for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. That's something that they really want to see in your project idea. They want to see that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander led programs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that build greater economic and social participation. And they want to see projects that create training and employment pathways for up to 800 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to increase their likelihood of greater economic and social participation. Just to clarify, your project doesn't need to create employment pathways for 800 people, but that's over the whole project, I believe, is the target.
That's correct.
Yeah. No one needs to be delivering to 800 people themselves. Yeah. Okay, so the type of projects that are funded, and I think this is really useful this list is really useful to look at, because sometimes it's really, particularly when a funding program is fairly new, which this is, you might not have seen yet projects that are up and running or heard about projects that are up and running. And I know sometimes it's really difficult to kind of figure out if your project is the kind of thing that might get funded. So this is a really useful list to consider. So it's a project-based delivery model, and it funds Indigenous-led projects to address training and skills challenge or opportunity with a specific focus on activities that support job outcomes and improved economic participation and advantage. So it's really expected that local solutions and new approaches will be developed to support transitions from school or training or work and increase training completions. We want to see the building of local workforce capability and ensuring that local non-Indigenous businesses have culturally safe workplaces. Obviously, that's really crucial because when we employ people, we want them to be safe in their workplaces, and that ultimately leads to retention of workforce. But really important that people are safe in the workplaces that they end up. Now, Indigenous organisations are encouraged to offer flexible projects that can be customised to meet individual needs and can include a mix of services and activities. So I hope you can see from this list some of the things that you might be able to include in your project. And if the idea that you have been considering is similar to one of these things or is the same as one of these things, then you're probably on the right track then. Another thing to note here is that the program is expected to complement other programs and not duplicate already existing services or funding. And that's often the case for funding opportunities. It's not usually there to duplicate something that's already happening, but it's really to create new opportunities in the community. Did anyone have any question about the type of project that can be funded under this program? Okay. Just let an extra person in.
It's on.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi.
Hi. How are you going?
Sorry. I was in the
you're
other room and then I come into this room.
Oh, is there another room?
I meant with my other colleague.
Oh, right. Okay,
Dina.
sorry.
Yeah.
Not a
And
problem. Not a problem.
I know Robert was trying to get on as well. We couldn't see your slides completely. That was all.
Oh,
we jump on our own computers. That was all.
Right. Yes. Sometimes sharing the computer can present some problems, but hopefully everyone can see everything now.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Welcome. Okay. Now, here's an example of a project idea, but it doesn't quite fit. And I'll read it out and maybe we can have a bit of a discussion about how this project could be tweaked to be more suitable. So for many years, a small town in central Queensland has seen a big drop in girls completing high school. A well-respected Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cooperative have developed a strong working relationship with the school, and they led the design of a culturally responsive training program which will support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander girls to finish their high school certificate and undertake some career exploration courses. Local businesses are providing in-kind work experience in food handling, barista, beauty treatments, hairdressing, and child or aged care. The support of the school and businesses has meant program costs are only $150,000. As $250,000 is available, the organisation decides to pay the girls an allowance to attend the program as an incentive to keep them engaged, even though it is part of a normal school day. They would also like to celebrate the success of the girls' graduation by throwing them a formal dinner event with gifts and entertainment at a cost of $20,000. The businesses are happy to support the program but can't commit to ongoing employment, and the school will only support the project needs if non-Aboriginal girls can participate. So let's have a chat about this one. Any ideas on what might not be quite right with this project idea? What could be tweaked? Maybe things that aren't eligible in this project idea?
Yeah, the financial inducement isn't able to be included.
The incentive, so paying someone to attend the program. Yep.
They might not be eligible because they're not an Aboriginal controlled organisation. Their board is probably not 50% or more Aboriginal participants. So that may stop them before they can even start.
So the organisation would need to check that they're actually eligible to be applying. Yep, that would be really important.
Yep, first thing, yep.
Anything else you've picked up? What do you think about, hi,
sorry, put my camera and mic on. I was going to suggest that potentially the $20,000 towards putting on a big event with gifts, probably not within the criteria, and also the fact that their school wants to open it up to non-Indigenous students. Participation doesn't fit this grant's criteria.
Excellent. I get a feeling that some of you have read the funding guidelines already or have possibly applied for this before, because you've got some really good answers to this. You're all really, you're on the money with this. Pardon the pun, on the money. The budget. Let's talk about that and the graduation. So it's not a problem to have some of your budget, allocated to some kind of graduation ceremony event. I think that's a really important part of programs like this. It's really important for to celebrate completion of programs and to be able to celebrate with community and families. But the really important thing to keep in mind with any kind of funding budget is the proportions. So for something, a program that's cost $150,000 is a $20,000 graduation, including gifts and appropriate allocation of funds. I would say probably not. I mean, I would love to be invited to that graduation event. It sounds very fancy. But if we're thinking about reasonable costs, I'm not sure that you would really be able to justify that level of expenditure. And that's a really important thing to consider with any funding that you're applying for, including this one, is what is a reasonable cost. So the department isn't always looking for, and funders are not generally looking for the cheapest delivery of things. Cheapest is not always best, doesn't get the outcomes that's required. But really the key here is value for money and ensuring that costs are reasonable and justifiable. So that's what I would say about the graduation ceremony. Please don't think that you can't include celebration and things like that in your budget, but it's just about if it's proportionate to the program itself. Anything else that anyone would like to ask or comment on as far as this particular project idea goes? Great. Question here from Janine. if our organisation doesn't have 50% Indigenous board of directors, but we have a strong partnership with one that does, can we still apply in conjunction with them? Great question, which I will not be answering myself. I will get Trin to answer.
No worries. Hi, I'm Janine. For this particular application, the organisation that applies must meet the eligibility of having at least 50% Indigenous board if you're not 100% owned or registered yourself. So in this case, you could partner with it, but the organisation that's eligible would have to apply.
Thanks, Trin.
That's all right.
May I ask a question?
Yes, we've just had a comment from Cassie that the sound is breaking up a bit in Cairns, and can we switch off cameras? If that's okay. Sorry to do that. I know it's nice to see people's faces, but we need for everyone to be able to hear. Thanks, Cassie, for letting me know. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. It's just in regards to the example and the comment about it wanting to include non-Indigenous participants. It just tweaked my memory of another grant we're currently delivering, which is for First Nations students. It's a school to work transition program through Digesbit. And one of the comments that's come in from some of the schools is that a couple of the students that don't want to participate in the program, they don't connect with their Indigenous cultural heritage, but the staff have said it's exactly the program that would benefit them if they did. And one of the things they've said is if that student could bring another non-Indigenous friend along, it would make them feel more comfortable and able to connect. I'm just wondering if when you're putting together a program, could it be that we don't actually fund the non-Indigenous student, etc., but they're allowed to potentially bring friend of any denomination to come along to let them connect and feel comfortable and safe to start their learning journey, I guess you'd call it.
That's a really good question. Now, I believe that is acceptable. I know we've discussed that as an option for projects. Trin, could you just clarify whether or not that's a suitable solution?
Yeah, that would entirely depend on the organisation that's received the grant, and as long as the entire, I guess, all those others that are participating are also okay with that. But yeah, you definitely wouldn't be able to report them as a participant on the project or record an outcome for them if they're just there as a support person. Yeah, that's shouldn't be an issue.
Yeah, sure. So just being really clear about the fact that the participants that aren't eligible for the program are not being counted in the KPIs.
And the other thing too is just be mindful of. So, for example, on our project, if we're going to give each participant a like a pack, that support person necessarily wouldn't be entitled to, because the project funds should only be used directly on those that are being assisted under the project.
Yeah.
So, for example, if they did like you know, an excursion day and you had to pay $50 for the cost of that excursion, you couldn't use the project funds to fund that support person to attend with them.
Thanks, Trin.
Yeah,
I think that's
just be mindful of that. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Cassie, I just wanted to check in with you to make sure that things are improving for you, or would you like me to turn my camera off as well? I can't see you. Oh, there you are.
No, everything's okay. I just think a few more cameras went up. It's either that or Uncle Jasper's coming into town, but it does sound a lot better right now.
Okay, good. Let me know though, and I can turn mine off if it gets dicey again. Yep.
Yes, all.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. We're going to move on to step 2 of the process, which is knowing your strengths. This is so important for organisations to get good at. When we look at funding opportunities, sometimes it's easy to get stuck in, oh, well, we haven't done that before, or we don't know anything about that, or and you know, even the same goes for looking at, you know, job positions that are available. Sometimes we can get caught in what we might not know or what we're not experienced in. But knowing your strengths as an organisation is so incredibly important for funding opportunities. Firstly, you need to know what your strengths are to be able to articulate them in a funding application. If you're going to write about why your organisation should be funded, you need to know what those strengths are. But secondly, knowing your strengths really assists your organisation with forming valuable partnerships with other organisations. So the kinds of partnerships that are really going to assist with any project delivery that you would like to do. Now, someone just came in. Let me make sure I admit that person. Right, okay, they're in. So find out what you don't know and put together a strengths-based inventory for your organisation. It's a really big task to do this, so it's important you don't, and it's important that you don't invest your time in writing an application if you don't know that it's the right fit for you. So doing this kind of activity, which is a strength-based inventory, and then we'll talk about your capacity and figuring out what the gaps might be, will really assist you figuring out whether or not this is the right funding opportunity for your organisation. If there's some development you need to do as an organisation to be able to deliver this program, or if there's quite a gap that you have as an organisation, but it could be filled through an appropriate partnership with another organisation in your community. So there's two useful activities to do. One is a strength-based inventory and one is a gap analysis. Now, the strengths-based inventory will help you understand what already exists in your organisation, whereas the gap analysis will assist you with thinking about who you need to partner with to deliver your project idea. Now, in my experience with sitting down with my own team in my organisation, there's often things that people have capability and expertise around that you might not even know about because you've not worked on a project before that just unveiled that. Perhaps you don't know that Vernon has a bus license, which would mean you could pick up the program participants, but your organisation doesn't have a bus. But hey, the aged care place does, and they don't use it on family visiting day, so you could partner with that organisation to use their bus. So there's all kinds of things that you might be able to do as an organisation that you just haven't quite figured out yet. So they're the kinds of things that I would suggest you sit down as an organisation and have a conversation about all the assets that you as an organisation have, all the things that you can offer to this program. Someone has a bus license, you've got really well-connected partnerships. Someone in your team is really good at doing social media, and so could create all kinds of social media posts that attract participants into the program. Or would be really good at doing the evaluation storytelling of the program. Maybe your organisation has secured a fantastic building and you've got a meeting room or a training room that would be absolutely perfect for delivering a learning program. So there's all kinds of things that your organisation will have, undoubtedly, that you can offer. That's a value add for different funding opportunities that come up. So has your organisation had experience in delivering this kind of service before? Do you have the skills, knowledge and capacity in your organisation to deliver this project? Are there similar projects being offered in your community already? Or an organisation better set up to deliver your proposed project? And is it possible for you to partner with that organisation to deliver the project together? Is there something your organisation actually does really well and you know it would add value to what that organisation is already doing? Now, something I would suggest doing before you apply is checking out on the departmental website is a list of previously funded projects or currently funded projects. Now, I think that's always a really good idea to check out what's being funded in your region or even in surrounding regions to see the kinds of things that are already being delivered to ensure that you're not duplicating an idea. But again, chatting to your people is a really good idea to get a feel for what's already happening in the region, and they will be able to give you some ideas as to what's worth pursuing, or maybe what kind of ideas need a bit more tweaking, or maybe some valuable partnerships that would be worthwhile taking up. Any comments or questions about the assessing your capacity and thinking about what value add your organisation can provide to this funding opportunity? All right. I'll keep going to strong relationships, which I know you do really well. And I always feel a little bit, when I talk to organisations about this particular aspect, I feel like this is the thing that they do really well. So I don't need to talk about it too much. But what I would say about funding opportunities is that it's really usually in your favour for nearly all funding opportunities to work in partnership with other organisations and with other agencies or businesses in your region. And what I would say about building relationships, if you're needing to establish new ones, is to start early. It always takes longer than what we think to form partnerships, particularly when they need to be formalised in any way for a funding opportunity. So if you need to have a letter of support or whatever it is that you need to do to establish that partnership, it can take some time. So I know that's always part of the process for me that takes a bit longer because you don't want to rush it. You want to have some good conversations about what your ideas are, make sure you're on the same page, because you don't want to have trouble once you're already funded, you don't want to be having that trouble down the line. So making sure that you've had lots of good conversations before you partner with an organisation. So you're really clear about what the purpose of the partnership is, what both parties or all parties are going to be bringing to the partnership, and having some really clear ideas about how you're going to work together. And again, I'm going to say that this lots of times through this webinar is talking to the funder. That's a really good way to ensure that you're on the right track. Okay, so now we start planning and gathering everything we need for a successful application. So this is that. So we've done that prep part. Of figuring out if we're eligible, figuring out what our capacity as organisation is, starting to chat to potential partners and forming those relationships and making sure we've made contact with our regional PIPO to chat about our idea. And now we're getting to that plan stage. So now we're actually getting into the nuts and bolts of the project idea itself, figuring out what the application process is, because sometimes, that will be different depending on what funding you're going for. So we'll talk a little bit about that, the process for this funding. And figuring out who needs to actually be involved in the whole application process. So a key message here is that starting early as possible on this part of the process. So I know we talked about the 22nd of Feb. That's the day in your diary for the day that this is due, your last day to get into the portal. But between that, we've got school holidays. They start next week. And Christmas, lots of people who will be having some kind of break over the Christmas period. So the key message here really is getting started now on this project idea and this part of the planning, so that when you come back to work in January or even Feb for some people, you've got a lot of the planning already done for writing your application. That grant in a survey research that I referenced earlier on in the session found that 54% of people who started a grant didn't submit it, and 38% of those people said it was because they ran out of time. So that's a lot of time, presumably hours kind of, I guess, wasted for those organisations who just ran out of time. So I really can't emphasize enough the need to start this process early, because I think I get shocked every time I put together a grant application as to how much time it actually takes me to get it all finished and edited and all the approvals done and all the things that I need to get it done. So it certainly isn't a on the day kind of job. Now, again, in that survey, 27% of the people who didn't actually submit their application didn't submit it because they figured out that they weren't eligible after they'd already started writing the application. So again, reiterating, emphasizing that, and again, that make sure you're eligible and your idea is eligible before you actually start writing the application. Now, I think someone else might have just come in. Here we go. Let me just let that person in. Okay, so let's dive into step 4, which is mapping out your project idea. Now, developing a project logic is one way to clearly think about how the activities or outputs you will deliver will cause the outcome that you're seeking. And I know project logic is kind of a, you know, it's one of those terms that, you know, gets used quite a bit, and it can be a bit complicated. But really, the core message here with program logic is thinking clearly about, if this is the outcome we want at the end of the program, what are the steps in between here and that end that will actually cause that outcome to happen. It's really being clear about how the activities we deliver cause that outcome that we'd like to see. Now, there's another video here that I will put into the post-event email that you get. Please watch it. It's a beautiful video. It really, I think it really displays quite well how different pieces of funding can be leveraged from one another to deliver a really rich program. So I'm going to go into the next slide. I'll make sure I send this video to you, and I do really recommend you watch it. But what I want to emphasize here is that this program, it commenced under so it's not under this particular program. Just want to be clear about this. We're just using this as an example of how different projects can be used together to really enrich one another and how you can leverage different funding opportunities. So this project commenced under the Queensland Government's Reef Assist program in February 2021. And 7 rangers completed a Cert 3 in Conservation Land Management with TAFE Queensland. And then they secured a funding extension until November 2022. And it was funded under Skilling Queenslanders for Work, the Work Skills Traineeships 2023. It's going to be run in Yarrabah. I think it is being run in Yarrabah with additional location of Kuranda to engage 8 trainee rangers for 26 weeks to complete a work skills traineeship. And the trainee rangers will undertake a nationally accredited Cert 1 in Conservation and Ecosystem Management with TAFE Queensland, and a series of complementary training to support safe work practices and employability post-completion of the traineeship. Now, in the video, it's a really great display of how different aspects have been brought into the learning program to make it really engaging for the trainee rangers who are participating. For example, bringing in scientists to talk about different aspects of the work that they're doing together. So please give that a watch. And when I watch that video, I wish that we could make a beautiful video about all of the different projects that happen, because it's a really great way of evaluating it, I think. So there's an idea about how we evaluate things anyway. It might be something in video production. Now, I do want to spend some time talking about this template. We'll send this to you. And for those who attended the face-to-face workshops, this was the A3 page that you got that you would have talked about during the workshop. Now, we've created this one for this funding opportunity, but I would really recommend that you use something similar, and you can create one yourself for any funding opportunity that you're looking at. It's called a project on a page, or a plan on a page, and it's got tips on how to map out your project idea. So in the different sections, you will see the different aspects of your project that you would need to think through. And when you get to the writing stage of your application, it's really useful to have been really clear about all of these aspects before you actually get to that writing stage, because you find that your writing will be really clear because you've actually thought through all of the crucial aspects of the funding application before you get to that stage. So this resource is really designed to help you describe and analyse and design your project model, so that when you get to that writing stage, it's really clear what you're writing about. It also really helps to think about how and if your project fits with your strategic plan and your organisation's mission, because it is often tempting when you see a funding opportunity to apply for it and hope for the best. But you do really need to find grants and funding opportunities that match your project and your organisation, and not the other way around. By doing this work upfront and really thinking about how all these elements fit together, you won't waste your time applying for a grant that doesn't match your project or that your project doesn't qualify for. So we'll send this to you. You'll be able to print it out and use it in your planning process. If for any reason you are not able to print in A3, or you're not able to print at all, I'm very happy to post it to you. Please let me know. You can reply to the post-event email that we send out, or your PIPO will have access. If they're visiting you, if you're having a conversation with them, you can ask them for a copy. They might be able to bring you one too, but really happy to post paper copies out to you if you prefer to get it that way. This is also, when I've spoken to organisations using this template or this resource, they've also said that it's really useful for when you're having a partnership conversation with an organisation. So you might have your project idea, you might have done some work as an organisation figuring out what you would like to deliver as an organisation, and you can take this filled out page to another organisation that you're hoping to partner with, and it can help you really just talk through all the aspects of the project, or you might even like to actually complete it with them and do it with them in partnership, so it's a really collaborative process. So there's a few different ways you can use this resource, and when you receive it from us, you'll see on the back page there's also a checklist of the different things that you need to submit with your application. So with any funding opportunity that you're going for, I do recommend making something like this for yourself, which asks you to step through all the crucial aspects of the project. You might be able to just adapt this one and make a checklist for yourself of the different documents that you need and milestones that you need to meet when applying for the funding. So for example, these are some of the key elements that this resource will ask you to step out. Who is your target cohort? Who are your existing connections, partners, networks, or alliances? What activities will you actually be delivering, and what evidence do you have to show that need? And that's a really important, we'll talk about this a bit more further along, but that's a really important aspect of your application, is actually being able to evidence that there is a need for it. Where will the project be delivered? Are you hoping to cover your whole region? Is this quite a small community that you're hoping to deliver in? Who's your target cohort? Who would you be attracting into the program? Who would your participants be? How does it meet the community needs, and how does it meet the labour market needs? So remembering again that this particular funding is not just about delivering learning outcomes and getting people to complete a qualification. It's also about meaningful working opportunities. So it's about career pathways. It's about having longevity in the workplace, not just being put into a role that doesn't really suit, and then you leave after a couple of months because it wasn't really a meaningful work opportunity for you. It's really about making sure that we meet those labour market needs and the workforce opportunities that are available to people. And importantly, how will you measure that impact? So for this project, if you're successful in receiving this funding, something that makes this a little easier is that you will need to submit monthly reports about how your participants are going. And in some ways, that actually makes the process of evaluation a little easier, because every month you're updating those KPIs and every month you're keeping on top of that evaluation. If you're applying for other funding, other opportunities, there might only be the need for a final report at the end of the project. Or you might only need to do a 6-month one and then a 12-month one. It really depends on what funding you get and what the service agreement looks like. But I would really recommend that you think carefully about how you're going to measure the impact and how you're going to evaluate the project right at the beginning, because that can be something that some organisations get a little caught out with, is delivering a great program, but getting to the end and not really having, might not have asked participants questions or have baseline data from the beginning of the project to measure their impact. Or they might have, it's really exciting, you're exhausted, you get to the end of your project, you finish it off, and then you think, I really should have surveyed or done some interviews or had a focus group or done something to actually measure the impact. That's really important, not just for meeting your service agreement requirements, so delivering what you said you were going to deliver, but having a good evaluation of anything that you deliver with funding provides evidence and credibility for your next funding application. So you really set your own organisation up well when you evaluate the programs that you deliver, because you will have something to put in your next funding application. We've delivered this previously, we had this percentage success, or however you want to talk about your success of your program. It's not always about numbers, it's also about the quality of the program delivery. So you might have quotes from people, you might have case studies. It might look different for whatever funding that you're delivering. Whatever funding you're delivering with, but the important thing here is to set your organisation up really well, and don't cut yourself short. Make sure you evaluate the stuff that you deliver really well, so that you've got some good evidence for next time. Okay. Understanding the application process. This can be tricky sometimes because different funders use a variety of online platforms for submitting grant applications. You may have already experienced a few of them. Making sure you read the guidelines early and are clear on what's expected of you when submitting the grant is very important. So does the application portal work on the web browser you have access to? You know, if your organisation or you're set up to use Chrome, Microsoft Edge or Firefox, depending on what it is that you use, different portals will sometimes not quite work with the browser that you're using. I've also heard of organisations previously. Now, this was a few years ago. I'm not sure if this would, I don't think this would happen now because devices have improved since then. But I have heard before of an organisation who went to apply for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, and at that time, the portal didn't work on devices other than a computer or a laptop, like a PC. And they had written their application, and then they went on holidays and they took their iPad with them. And they thought, I'll just do some finishing touches on it while I'm on my holiday and I'll submit it on the due date. And they found that the portal did not work on iPads or iPhones. It would only work on a PC, on a computer, and they didn't have access to one. And they had done all that work preparing their application. And on that day, they weren't actually able to submit it. So that's kind of just a caution to make sure you have access to the right equipment and you know what you're doing before the day. Excuse me. Any other tips from Trin or any of the PIPOs about the portal process? I know that some applications, not necessarily this one, but I know that applications I've worked on for funding before, they might have had a portal, but they did have rules about how you could format your document. So it had to be a certain font size and font type and line spacing and page numbers and that kind of thing. Sometimes that's something that you need to pay attention to depending on the funding opportunity. For this funding, it is a portal process.
Yeah, I'll just add, just making sure that you stick with the word limit or be aware of that. And documents that you attach, make sure you do attach them. They're PDF documents that you'll have to upload as part of your application. Some questions in the portal won't let you continue until you upload. And then just checking at the end that you've attached everything that you wanted to by reviewing your application. If there are any attachments that you realise after submitting that you've missed, on that same day, you could, if you've already submitted it and it's just one or two attachments that you've realised that haven't gone through, you could just email them to us and we'll attach it to your application manually. But yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Trin. Good advice there, and we'll talk a little bit more about word limits soon when we talk about breaking down the assessment criteria. But that is a really important point, and a lot of applications these days do have a word limit. And this again is why that prep and planning is really important, because you don't have unlimited words to kind of put your case forward for your project. You do need to be really mindful about how many words you're using to describe your project. And a tip about attaching documents, this is something that sometimes catches people out, is if you have applied previously for funding, you might have attachments saved in your e-filing from your last application. Make sure you're naming the files, you know, that the date or the funding round, the year, the right year, whatever it is you need to be to ensure that you're clear about what you're attaching. Don't accidentally attach last year's letter of support or last year's budget or etc. So that's just a tip about keeping the e-filing nice and neat and make sure those file names are really clear. So before applying, you are strongly encouraged to attend a grant writing workshop, you can tick that off because you're here today. Use the online resources found through the department and QCOS website. So we will send you those links and make sure that you're looking through the resources that are available to you. Please talk to your principal Indigenous program officer about your idea. They're a wealth of support and information. Please chat to them about that, and submit a draft project proposal to the department. So there is a template to do that. You are encouraged to do that and get some feedback. Just on Monday in Strathpine, we were talking about how organisations had found that useful, getting some feedback about their project idea before progressing to the actual application process. So again, that feedback directly from the funder is really such a useful thing to do, and will really give you some good tips and make sure that you're on the right track and you're not spending lots of hours putting together an application that might not quite be right for the funding. So make sure you take up that opportunity. Now, there will be one funding, so my understanding is that there's one funding round held each year for 2 years up to the 23-24 year. There is a really transparent contestable application process. So if there's any conflict of interest between organisation applying and the principal Indigenous program officer, looking at the drafts, I believe the draft program, the draft project idea goes to someone else to give feedback on. So there's a really fantastic process that's been worked out for organisations to make sure they get the feedback that they need, and that the process is really transparent. Now, one lead Indigenous organisation is to apply and manage the funding for each project, and we've already talked about making sure the lead organisation is eligible. There's no flexibility on that. The lead organisation must be eligible for the funding, but they can partner with other organisations. This funding round has opened on the 13th of November, and applicant organisations are encouraged to submit the draft, which we've spoken about, to receive some feedback before they go on to the rest of the application process. So the administrative side of things, this is the thing that I sometimes put off, and I need to make myself do it earlier, is set up a username and password early. So go to the website, make sure you know where the portal is, set up your username and password. Now make sure your team can access that account if you're absent or no longer available. People do move on from their jobs sometimes midway through a process like this, so make sure more than one person knows what the login details are. Figure out what you actually need to submit the application. So it is very stressful to figure out on the day that you're actually submitting an application that there are documents that you need that you don't actually have. And sometimes it will be too late to get those in time. So making sure you have the letters of support that you might need, and we'll talk a little bit more about letters of support soon. Ensuring that you've got all the attachments, so certificates of insurance, that kind of thing, evidence of your ABN, all the things that you will need to attach. So have a bit of a play around in the portal, click through it, see what you need, see what it looks like, make sure you're familiar with it, that you know where it is, and of course always review all the information that you've put through and the attachments that you've attached before you hit the submit button. But if something goes a little pear-shaped, just make sure you get in touch with the department. Now, planning ahead. Good planning will really ensure that you have all the things that you need for a strong grant application. And it is, again, quite stressful to get to the day of or even the day before and realise you haven't got crucial things that you might need for your application. All kinds of things can happen. Maybe your finance officer is sick and you don't know where they keep the audited income and expenditure statements for the organisation, or where the insurance certificates are kept. I know that's the kind of thing that when I am putting together a funding application, I need to ask a particular person within QCOS where those things are, because she keeps them very safely in a filing system. A lot of funding opportunities these days, and this might not be for this one, but many do ask for key resumes of key staff. Sometimes funding opportunities won't ask for the whole resume, but they might ask for the person's qualifications, particularly if it's delivering content that might be sensitive, or that they know that there are regulations around who can deliver particular content. I know that for funding applications we've put together before, we've had to say what our qualifications are to be able to put in the application. You might need you definitely will need a project plan, your training and support plan and quotes. You might need for applications your organisation's mission statement or history, including evidence of success and capability. So we would recommend you have a spot where you keep all of these things, where you know where they are, you know where the most up-to-date copies of those things are. You might have letters of support from local employers and industries and partnering organisations who are all contributing things for this particular application that you're putting together. I would recommend also putting in your grants reference library any feedback you've had from previous applications, whether it's successful or not, because that will contain really good information when you're putting together applications for future applications, so funding opportunities. So even if it's not one that you worked on yourself, if I had a folder at QCOS that had past applications in it, we do have records of previous things that we've applied for but haven't been successful. And there's some notes on why we weren't successful. That's a really useful thing for you to consider when you're writing the next funding application. Oh, the feedback they gave us was that we didn't have enough evidence for the need in our community. So let's make sure when we're doing this one this time, we really bolster that aspect of our application. Or there might be feedback about the budget was too vague. So let's make sure we really make a really detailed budget this time around. So successful and unsuccessful feedback is really, really useful to have somewhere saved in your organisation to refer to. You might even also include a list of ideas of things that you would love to deliver as an organisation, but you're waiting for the right funding to come along for it. So they're all the kinds of things that you might keep in this particular folder. You know, everything's there ready for when you need to attach all the attachments in the portal. Would anyone add anything to that list? No? Who else needs to be involved in this process? Because once you've decided you do want to go ahead with a grant application, it really does pay to think about who needs to be involved in the process and how long you need them for, what their contribution to the process might be. Particularly in small organisations, it is often one person doing most of the pulling together of a funding application. However, it is very likely that you have some kind of process in your organisation for getting approval. I know when I'm putting through a funding application, I definitely need help with the budget because our finance officer has a special calculation for wages, including superannuation, all that kind of thing, that she keeps up to date. And that's not something that I have expertise in. So whenever I'm doing a funding application, I make sure I run the budget past her. I actually usually get her to do, I tell her what needs to be in the budget and she will usually put it together. So she's someone that's crucial to me when I'm putting through a funding application. I know I can't submit an application without our CEO signing off on it. So I need to go, all right, well, if the due date's the 22nd of Feb, and Amy's going to be on leave during the school holidays, so what day do I need to have my draft done so that it can get to her to be approved on time? So you're really just figuring out who are all the people involved in this process and how are they involved, and making sure you let them know that they have some kind of contribution to make to this process. So it might be the person signing off, like the chair of your committee, or your president, might be the CEO. You might have someone who works on the budget. I really hope you have someone who can just read through the application and help you proofread it before you submit it. So they might not need to have any expertise in the actual program delivery itself. It might be someone who works in your org as an admin officer, or just one of your any colleague in your organisation that can read through your application to proofread it. But the point here is that even if someone's role in submission seems small, it's really important that they all know that they will be needed in the process. And so it helps you identify where you might have a hiccup in your timeline, because what we do in our organisation is we have what we call a project or a grant kickoff meeting, where it's very, very quick, but we just say, hey, we're working on this grant application that's due on the 22nd of February. Annette, I'm going to need you to do the budget in that week before it's due. Amy, I'm going to need some time in your diary 3 days before it's due to make sure you're happy with it before we submit. Deema, I'm going to need your help with locating the insurance certificates that I need. Sarah, you've got a really good relationship with that organisation we like to partner with, so you and I can work together when we come back from leave in January to make sure that that partnership's sorted and we've got a letter of support. I'm just kind of detailing all the different bits and pieces that you might need to think about when you're putting together a plan for writing the application itself. So again, even if it's mostly you doing most of the writing, the bulk of the work itself, you can see where other people might be involved in the process. And by letting them know early on what you need them to do, you can figure out where they might be on leave, or they are planning on travelling at that time. You know, they're going to be out and about visiting organisations at that time, so they're not actually going to be around to proofread. So you're going to need the draft done a week earlier than what you thought. So you just get to identify all those little bits and pieces that might present some problems on the day or on the week if you didn't know about it beforehand. Any questions about that? I know I'm giving you a lot of content at the moment, so and it's really difficult to kind of stay engaged when we're online. So thanks for sticking with it, and a reminder again, I'll send these slides to you afterwards, so you'll be able to go through these again. I'm going to go on to mapping your timeline, and this is really linked to figuring out who your key players are in the grant writing process. So we work backwards from the due date. We know that's the 22nd of February. We need to allocate jobs. So who's doing what part of the grant writing? Think in detail about the different tasks. Does a new relationship or partnership need to be established? How many yarns might you need to have between now and when the application's due, to get clear on what different parts your organisation and their organisation will be delivering? Keeping in mind that if you're partnering with an organisation, they will probably want to be able to review the application too before you submit. So figuring out all those different tasks that need to be done. Thinking about the approval process. So how many people do you need to approve it in your organisation? Is it a CEO as well as the chair, or is it just the CEO? Is there a manager in between you and the CEO? How many people does it need to go through, and realistically, how many days each do they need to kind of find time in their diary to do that? And put all the deadlines and allocate time in your calendar to work on those things. Particularly for organisations who are doing service delivery every day, working on stuff like this, finding time in your diary to work on stuff like this can be really tricky, because you're busy every day, often doing frontline service delivery and working on projects that you've already got funding for. So trying to carve out some time in your diary to work on the application is a really good if you're able to do that. And then creating an application plan checklist. So all the things that you know you need to have for actually submitting that application. You can get feedback on your draft. You will need to have all the key people identified. You will need to make sure that you meet the funding requirements, your project idea meets the funding requirements. Map out your project idea, be really clear about who you do want to partner with for this project. All of those kinds of things are things that you would write into your application plan checklist, and you can do that for any funding that you're applying for, making sure you're clear about all the things that you need to have in place to be able to apply. Now, we're moving into really meaty part of the webinar now, where we talk about actually answering the assessment criteria, which is a really crucial aspect of of your application. And we have a lot of writing tips on how you actually break down the assessment criteria. And this is a really useful part of the webinar. But I'm aware that I've been talking for a while now, and I'd like to have a quick, well, I'd like not only for me to grab a glass of water, but for all of you to have a quick break, because I know we've been online for a while now. So I'm just proposing that we have 5 minutes at least for all of you to grab a drink, grab a cuppa, go to the toilet, do whatever it is that you need to do. So I'm proposing that we come back at, let's say 11:26, if that's okay. I know that's quite precise. Yep, great. Okay. Let's all be back. Let's have a 5 minutes, grab a cup or whatever you'd like to do. I'll be back at 11:20, let's say 11:27, ready to jump into the assessment criteria piece.
Thanks, Stacey.
See you soon. Hi, Cassie. How are you going?
Yeah, good.
That's good. Ren let me know that the workshops up there went well. Sounded like
Great.
you guys had a good conversation with orgs.
I think we had a good conversation. I can see a couple have joined us online as well for a refresher. So
Nice.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. It's always a bit different doing it online, but good for anyone who wasn't able to make the other ones, and of course a good refresher too for people. So I had a really nice time with Jason in Strathpine.
Excellent.
Which was good. Yeah. We had a good conversation, a couple of orgs there. So yeah, it was really nice.
Wonderful, wonderful news. Excellent. It's a lot of information here. It's really valuable. So yeah, we're getting through it. It's excellent.
Yeah,
Thank you.
there is a lot of information, so I know it's kind of heavy going because it's just a lot to hear all at once. But yeah, well, for anyone who's coming back and joining us now, you'll get all the slides. So, and never hesitate either to contact your PIPO or even QCOS just to clarify anything that doesn't seem quite clear in the content that you get. But we hope that the slides will be. We've tried to make them so that they're useful for anyone who's just reading through the slides as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Excellent.
All right. Well, we might get back into things. Hopefully everyone's back with their cuppa, or I mean, a lot of us, I think we're probably, I don't have aircon where I am. I'm under the fan, so I don't have a cuppa. I have a cold glass of water. But hopefully you've got what you need. Let's get into the rest of this, the content. This is really about the writing of the application itself. Now, we've talked about having a clear project idea. So you might have done the project on the plan and you've got all the, you know who you're targeting, you know what location you're working in, the scope of the project, what kind of activities you're going to be delivering. Now we're going to talk about how you actually address the assessment criteria. It's really important, again, to plan your response before you write, because planning what you want to write will really ensure what you write is bang on the money. So every word matters, particularly when you have a short word allowance. And we have talked about that for this. There is a word limit, and we'll talk about that a bit more and give you kind of a suggestion of how you might be able to allocate your words to give a really balanced answer. But write your application as though the person reading it knows nothing about your organisation or your project. Never assume anything about the reader. So the person assessing your application will not be the PIPO you've had a conversation with. It will likely be someone in head office, and this is usually for any funding opportunity that you're going for. You don't know who's assessing your application. They might not be from your region, so they're often not familiar with your organisation. So it's really important that you write as though the person reading it doesn't know your organisation or the kind of work that you do, which is why we need to be really clear. So when we write creatively, we tend to build up to the detail in stages by introducing characters and scenes, and we create a sense of intrigue and wonder. And, well, with creative writing, what makes it fun is that there's a twist or mystery or conflict in the story somewhere. Now, this is exactly what an assessor reading an application doesn't want to see. No twist or mystery or conflict, and not introducing details slowly, but they want to see the exact opposite. What they would like to see is key messages up first with supporting points, and then your examples and data and evidence. So all the things that you've gathered that evidence the need for your project in your community. Often applications are being shortlisted. Assessors don't have heaps and heaps of time to be reading applications over and over. So it's important that they're clear when they read them the first time what it is that you're trying to communicate. And by putting examples and data and evidence down the bottom, I absolutely don't mean to say that it's less important, but that you need to start with your key message, and that evidence and that data is really what is the foundation for those key messages. And you can see here that evaluating your project thoroughly, any project that you deliver, will give you a good set of data for future projects and funding. So if you're constantly evaluating the work that you do, you will have a fantastic set of data to use when you go for funding again. So these are the things that the department is looking for. It's really crucial that you understand what the person reading your application is looking for when they're reading it. As you're going through that criteria, look back at your checklist and project on a page template to make sure you're addressing all the key points. Under the assessment criteria, the department, so when you go into a portal, most of them, it'll ask you for all the details of your organisation. What's your organisation's trading name? Who's the contact person, the email address, the phone number, your insurance, all that kind of thing. And then it will be asking you for responses to the assessment criteria. And in that section, they're looking for what's your capacity to manage as an organisation, how your project responds to community needs, what assistance strategies you have, what community outcomes your project will result in, and then the finances. So what's the cost value for money? That's where you're putting in your budget. Here's an example that doesn't meet the department's requirement. I'll read it out, and when I'm reading it, you will probably see that there's some good information in here, but it doesn't directly address each point in the assessment criteria. The key messages are not clear and there's no evidence. And you might also be able to pick up on some areas where you can simplify the language and cut words to help with the word count, because that, again, is something we need to keep in mind, is that there's a word count here. So the example is this. To address the high Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander unemployment rate in community, a collaborative Indigenous-led approach is required to provide culturally safe environments and relevant teachings for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander job seekers. When Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are employed, providing a regular source of income will allow them to participate in the local community as they go about day-to-day life, help lower crime rates, improve health conditions and family life. Our project will support and prepare Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for jobs in healthcare industry. Below are some of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and non-Indigenous organisations we will partner with on this project: Ipswich City Council, Sky Training, Community Health Services and Skilled Mob Workforce. So this is not necessarily a bad idea, but it really does lack detail and there's no evidence. So this organisation may very well believe that their project is a good one, and it may be a very good one, but for the funder, the person reading this application, there's not any evidence there that this is a project that's needed in the community. It's not specific enough, and there's nothing to really back it up. The assessor, if they were to fund this project, would just really need to go on good faith, just believing that this organisation must know what they're talking about. And again, that may be the case. The organisation may have a very good case for this project, but they need to make sure they put it in the actual response. So if you're going to map out your project visually, it might look something like this. Hang on. Go back to that, sorry. You can use bullet points and sub-dot points to build a response, and using a visual map can be helpful when you need to explain your project to the people and to the department. So you can see here that we've started to allocate some word limits. And you can allocate your own word limits if you would like to do this. This is just a suggestion on how you might evenly respond to the assessment criteria. So the key points the funding body is looking for need to go in those top boxes. Now, for this funding opportunity, you have a total character count, not word count, character count of 3,500 characters per selection criteria, which is roughly 500 words. It's about 500 words. So we've used this map here on the screen to map out an example of how you could draft up your structure for your response so that you keep within the character count. Because it's likely that, well, I know when one's portals I've used before, once you get up to a certain amount of characters, you can't actually put any more, like it doesn't actually physically let you put any more words in the box. So you will be held to that, that restriction. So for the assessment criteria about responding to community needs, there are some things that you need to really talk about in your response. If you've got roughly 500 words to say that, we would suggest that you might spend 100 words talking about local need. So have your key message first and then your evidence for that. How do you know that that is a local need in your community? Then you might spend about 150 words talking about the labour market, 150 words talking about the community benefits, so how your project idea will benefit your community, and then about 100 words on workforce capability. These are just suggestions. You might want to dissect it in a slightly different way, but this is a way that you can have a balanced answer to the assessment criteria. Often when assessors are marking or assessing a funding application, they will have some kind of scoring matrix. So for example, and I'm not saying that this is the process that they use for this, but let me just put an example out there. Imagine the assessor needs to mark this paragraph or this response to the assessment criteria, and they have a score out of 20 to give. And maybe they're scoring 5 marks for local need, 5 marks for labour market, 5 marks for community benefit, and 5 marks for workforce capability. You might, in your response, have you might spend 400 words brilliantly making a case for the local need in your community. So they can give you 5 out of 5 for that. Great. 5 out of 5 for establishing the local need. But you've only left yourself 100 words to talk about labour market, community benefit and workforce capability. And that assessor can't really give you full marks for all of those points in your assessment criteria because you spent so many of your words talking about local need but left yourself very little to actually respond to the rest of the assessment criteria. Now, that's an example of where you might have a brilliant response to part of the assessment criteria, but you won't be able to get full marks really in their scoring matrix if you've not given yourself enough word count or space in the response to adequately respond to the rest of things. So really the key message here is ensuring that you respond to every aspect of the assessment criteria, not just the part that you can confidently respond to, and making sure you have evidence and it's really clear that you are responding to each aspect of the assessment criteria. Now we'll go through an example so you can see what I mean here. So this is a fictitious and abridged response to show how the mapping might look in writing your first draft of the application. I'm not saying this is perfect, but it does show how the thought process of planning your key messages and the supporting information can work. So if you're going to use the map that we just had on the screen, your response might look something like this. Project X will support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to gain entry-level roles in the health sector and explore further career options. Project X addresses labour shortages in Ipswich's health sector by developing the skills of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and supporting them into identified health service roles. 65% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people avoid addressing health concerns when they don't feel safe with the health service or worker. In the 2021 Queensland Health Matters report, healthcare providers have reported that having an identified employee provides a level of security for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander patients and clients, and appropriate care can be provided. Program X will provide a holistic and culturally responsive approach to securing employment that fills a service gap for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people living in Ipswich. Okay, so first paragraph there, I think the assessor's probably reading that and going, yeah, okay, there's some evidence there for the need for this in the local community. Paragraph 2. Project X will address identified gaps in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander labour force by providing a culturally safe service to support a viable career pathway for those looking for work in the healthcare sector. According to ABS data, As of March 2023, the unemployment rate in Ipswich is at 6.5% compared to 4% in Greater Brisbane and 3.8% in Queensland. The unemployment rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Ipswich region is 14.5% compared to non-Aboriginal people. There is a high demand for workers in the Ipswich region, with healthcare and social assistance being the largest employing sector. Jobs Queensland, anticipating future skills report, projects employment in these occupations which will remain in the top 5 until 2025 to 26. Great. I think the assessor's reading this and going, okay, it's really clear what the local labour market need is. So far, the person responding to this assessment criteria is really hitting the mark as far as making sure there's evidence for the things that they're saying. Next paragraph, we're talking about benefit to community. Self-determination is paramount to achieving improved health outcomes. By strengthening the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workforce of Ipswich's health services, the broader Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community will benefit from accessing culturally safe and supportive health services. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health workers can share with their family and community the importance of early intervention healthcare, reducing the risk of major health complications that put further pressures on our emergency services and hospitals. Evidence shows, and you need to refer to something here, a report of some kind, that strengthening the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workforce and service provision has a direct impact on improved local economy, reducing the risk of poverty associated with disadvantage, such as homelessness, family violence, and substance use. Local workforce capability. Project X's key objective is for the success of participants to create a ripple effect and inspire other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to consider a career in healthcare. To reduce the risk of low retention due to culturally unsafe workplaces, employers will be provided with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural safety and awareness training. Our organisation will continue to support participants and our employment partners through mentoring and support for the entirety of the program. Letters of support from partner Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community organisations and employers are attached. So a big difference here between this example, and obviously you wouldn't have those words in bold in the brackets. That's showing you how this response to the assessment criteria is directly linked to this mapping that we looked at. You could see there clearly that there was a paragraph there on local need, one on labour market, community benefit and workforce capability. And importantly, they were fairly even responses. So we had a fairly, kind of a very similar amount of words spent on each aspect of that. So the assessor is able to go through and very clearly see that, yep, you've talked about all the things that we asked you in the assessment criteria, and you've got a really balanced answer. Very different to this example here, where it was quite vague and there was no evidence to back up the responses. I just want to pause there to see if there's any comments or questions about that particular process. No? Okay. So again, the assessment criteria is used by the funder to score and rank your proposal in relation to others. And you should be aware that sometimes different people may assess different parts of the criteria. So just keep that in mind when you're writing. Don't make, again, assumptions about what the reader knows and what you've already said, ensuring that you've got really clear and whole answers to every assessment criteria. So the assessment criteria tells you what's most important to address. So while you might get, you want to say a lot about particular parts of your organisation or programs that you're delivering, it's really important that you spend your word count responding directly to what the funder has asked you, and that you respond to all the assessment criteria. Again, even if you address some of them brilliantly, if you don't address all of them, it won't be a successful application. It's really important that you answer all of the questions and you answer them wholly. It shows that you understand the goals and the requirements of the program. So when a funder is reading through your application, they will be able to tell, this organisation seems to really understand the purpose of this funding that we're giving, and that's really important. It's your opportunity to show your unique value as an organisation, why you should be funded to deliver the program, it demonstrates that you understand the requirements. It's your opportunity to provide all your supporting material, demonstrate your capacity to deliver the project, demonstrate the value for money that you can give, and of course, your unique value add as an organisation. The assessment criteria should really reflect what is most important to the funder. So just really keeping that in mind when you're answering the assessment criteria. And so here are some tips. Be clear about what you're asking for and why. Include important information, but keep it simple and clear. Put your key messages first. Always provide evidence to back up your message. So if you're wanting to make a case for the need in your community, it's really important to have some evidence there for that. And answer each criteria using the writing map. And you can use that map for any funding that you're applying for. If you break down the assessment criteria and what they're actually asking you for, and then you figure out how many words you've got to use for that assessment criteria, you can allocate a word count to each of those and use that as a guide when you're responding to make sure you do have a balanced answer. We might actually we might skip over this because this is probably better suited to if we're in the room together, we would have a bit of a discussion about our projects that we're currently working on and discussing these aspects of the project. So I really encourage you to do that in your organisations, with organisations that you're partnering with, to discuss your project ideas together and ensure that you really have a good idea about how you're going to address those assessment criteria. So again, just going over this for responding community needs, your assessment, so that's just one of the assessment criteria. You're describing how the project will address identified gaps or complement or link to existing local services and programs. You're outlining how the project is responsive to local community needs and supports improved economic participation. You're detailing how the project aligns to local labour market needs, what's the short-term and long-term benefits to the community, and how will the project build local workforce capability or ensure that local non-Indigenous businesses have culturally safe workplaces. Now, this is a very important aspect of grant writing, and even once you receive funding, making sure you're clear on this particular process. It is, and I've said this a couple of times and I'll say it again, it's really valuable to evaluate your project. It provides you with supporting material for future funding, but for nearly all funding that you receive, it'll be part of your service agreement. So really important that you're clear about how you're evaluating your project and what you're obliged to report and when those reports are due. So for this project, if you receive the Indigenous Workforce Skills Development Grant funding, you will have reporting and acquittal requirements that we'll talk about in the next slide. But thinking about how you're going to measure your outcomes ahead of time will really provide you with what you need come reporting and acquittal time. Now, this is an important thing to consider while you're writing your application, particularly if it's not one where you have template reporting, like monthly reporting, which you will need to do for this funding. But thinking about how you will measure your success or what you've said you're going to do is a great way to put a bit of a lens of, is this realistic over what you say you're going to do? And I've definitely had this experience before where I thought, yeah, we could deliver this and we could do these regional workshops and we could hold this big event and we'll probably get 100 people. And then I get really excited about the idea itself and what I think the organisation might be able to deliver. And then when I get to actually how I would evaluate it, how I would report on it, it makes me go, is 100 people realistic? Would we really get that many people? Do I need to maybe rethink some of the scope of this project and what I'm proposing we deliver? Thinking about how you're going to evaluate it really does help you make sure that what you're proposing is realistic. And that goes for any funding ever that you're applying for. Ask yourself, how will we, if we delivered this, how would we measure it? How would we evaluate it? And if thinking about measuring it and evaluating it, really seems quite unrealistic because you realise it's gotten a little bit too big than what you could realistically do, you can then, before you submit, make sure you refine your project, make sure it is something realistic, make sure it is something that you could evaluate and could measure and prove your impact. So it's a really good idea to think about that right back when you're in the grant writing process. So while evaluating your project can feel like a bit of a drag, it is very valuable to strengthen your work and can provide supporting material to gain future funding again. But the other thing that I think is really important about evaluating your work is that you as an organisation and anyone working in the front line, you want to be really confident that what you're delivering is good stuff. I don't think anyone feels very satisfied delivering a project when they're not quite sure if it works or not. So having a way of measuring your impact as an organisation is a really good way to ensure that those delivering the project feel really satisfied with the work that they're doing, and that you as an organisation can feel really confident about the work that you're doing. And the work will pay off. It gives you really good data for your next project. Now, for this one, if you are successful in receiving this funding, you will have KPIs in your service agreement, and you will need to provide monthly progress reports, and there is a template for that. And then you will, at the end of your project, you will be required to acquit the grant and provide a final report within 6 months after completion of the project. So for this particular one, that's what you'll need to do. And the PIPOs, again, will be there to support you throughout the project. Any questions or comments about the reporting for this funding? I hope everyone's still awake because I can't see your faces. Okay, supporting documents. What do I need? Okay, so as you're writing your responses to the assessment criteria, you will also need to be thinking about how you show the strength of your project and what things you will need to submit along with the assessment criteria. So Trin mentioned earlier that the portal, in some parts of it, you won't actually even be able to move on to the next bit until you've attached what you need to attach and make sure you're attaching the right ones. So you will probably need things like partnership agreements if you're partnering with an organisation, letters of support from the community, so other organisations or businesses, local council. You'll need your budget. You might also have photos or videos or quotes that you need to submit, community stories or news articles. There's all kinds of things that you might be wanting to attach to your application. Now, when assessors are reading through your application, there are two things they're going to ask themselves. Is this project realistic and does it represent value for money? Again, doesn't have to be the cheapest, but does it represent value for money? And this goes back to, the $20,000 on the graduation activity. Is it proportionate to the rest of the project? And can we show what the need is and why the project is important? Once they've read your application, that should be very, very clear to the assessor. This is a need in that community and this project will meet that need. Now, you know your organisations very well and you will know what's needed to address the problems that you're seeking to solve in your community. The funding bodies in the big smoke, or as my family in Central Queensland call Brisbane, the Great South Beast, they do not know you and they do not know your community and you need to show them. So data can help do this in a way people who don't work in community understands. By using relevant current data, it paints a picture of the issue you're trying to solve and that you understand your community well. Using data gives you a baseline to evaluate your project. So particularly over a longer period of time, being able to show shift in particular stats is really useful for showing the impact of a particular program or an approach. And using data can help you build on a program idea each year. You can make it stronger each time. Like the Ranger program we referred to earlier, and there is a video I'll send you on that. They were able to refine their project and leverage off different funding as time went on to really enrich that program. Now, data can be a bit of a, I know it can be a little daunting to use depending on what your experience is with data. And in the organisation I work in, I'm really fortunate to have a colleague who is very familiar with data sources, and I've actually worked with her a few times on some grant writing to make sure we're using relevant data, and she's actually put together a bit of a list here of sources of data that she uses regularly and that you can use in your application. So I'll go to that in the next slide, but I just wanted to reiterate here that using data specific to your community and the target cohort you want to work with is really important. So if you're wanting to deliver a project on Per Se Island, referencing Queensland data is probably not going to be quite relevant unless you're using it as a reference point. You're comparing Per Se Island data to the broader Queensland data. But you need to be making sure that you use data that's quite specific to your community and the target cohort you want to work with. So drilling down to that level is really important. The other thing to think about is using current data. So use our list of suggested open data sources and update your application whenever new data is available. And this is sometimes something that happens when organisations reapply for funding year after year. And sometimes they do forget to update their data because new data does become available. So do get familiar with where you got your data from and make sure when you apply again next time that you check that there isn't more contemporary data available to you. But really importantly, use your community or organisational knowledge to add story behind the data. Numbers are numbers and they are important, but they don't tell the whole story. So it's really important that you are putting your very, very relevant and important organisational knowledge with the data to build the story that you want to paint. So here's the most relevant open data sources that we would recommend. And when I say open data sources, what I mean by that is that they're freely available to the public. You don't need to subscribe to anything. You can access these data points at any time, and you will be able to find the data that you need. Now, what I will put in the post-event email is a link to a webinar that we recorded a couple of months ago around using data in funding applications, where we actually go onto these websites and show you how to filter some of the data. So some of you won't need that because you will be familiar with these data sources, but if this is new to you, you might find it useful to watch that webinar and see how the data can be filtered for your own community. On the QCOS website, we also have community data profiles, quite a few regions in Queensland. So that's another thing I would suggest you check out. We will put that link into the post-event email because there are some regions where we have actually put together data profiles for the community, and you might be able to use some of the data out of there. And in those community data profiles, we use these open data sources. So these are reliable sources of data that anyone can use in their application. We also have a using data guide that we'll put in the post-event email too. So the key message really here is making sure you're combining your own data with open data sources and stats, making sure you're really painting a picture for your community, and then making sure you tell your success story too. So evaluate your program, do some interviews, take photos, do up some case studies, get some quotes, do some data storytelling. Remember that population data and general research can only say so much, and it's your local knowledge that will really add richness to the data that you're using. Now, this is a 4-step process for telling impactful data stories. This is from SEER Data and Analytics, and it's just a nice pictorial way of displaying how they suggest using data. So first, they suggest identifying the most important or impactful data story for your intended audience. So what's the question you're seeking to answer? Will the trainee ranger program lead to better employment outcomes for local First Nations people? Well, determine how you're going to identify your answer. Is there data available? Are there successful programs you can use them as an example? Be open and curious when looking at the data. You might see your answer in a new light. And know your audience. Is the purpose to get funding? What are you actually trying to communicate here? Then simplify. How can you tell this data story in the most simplistic way so anyone can understand it? Make sure you drop any jargon or acronyms and be really clear about what it is that you are saying. Then visualize. How can you make this engaging for people to consume? So how can you deliver a clear message that's visually appealing? You can use color, images, graphics, photos, all kinds of things that can really put forward the message of the success of the project. And of course, humanize. So layering your data with human elements. That's where quotes are really good. That's where videos are really good. And all of those things obviously have time attached to them. It's not easy to put together a video. I'm absolutely not suggesting that you all need to go and make a video about your project, but you might have that capability within your organisation. You might find that that's a realistic way to tell a story. But absolutely doing things like including a story, a case note, a case study, a quote, really assists bringing that data to life. Any questions about evaluation before I do start talking about the budget? Okay. Now, budgets, they can be difficult. I think they're probably challenging for most people. And even the most experienced grant writer and established organisations like us, like QCOS, even we get a little bit, stuck with budget. No one really loves budget. Well, that's not true. There's probably some people out there who genuinely do love budgets. But it's not me. And I don't meet many people who love budgets. But we can give you some tips around budgets. Firstly, again, make sure you read the funding guidelines for whatever funding you're applying for to see what costs are allowed in the funding. There will always be rules about what kinds of things are eligible and what things are not eligible for funding. And be realistic when setting your budget. Again, going back to the example at the beginning with the $20,000 graduation night, is it realistic? You want to be competitive, but you also need to ensure that you have thought through all the costs of delivering the project, and we absolutely don't want any organisations putting themselves out of covering their costs because their budget wasn't realistic or they were trying to do it as cheaply as possible. Everything costs a lot of money at the moment. Travel costs a lot of money. Food, catering costs a lot of money. Everything, it costs a lot. So please think carefully about your budget. Ensure that you're covering all of your costs and you're being realistic. Be competitive, yes, but please do not put yourself in the red because you're trying to do it as cheaply as possible. So are the proposed activities and outcomes sufficient to justify the amount of funding sought? So the assessors, the funder, will look for value for money. Is this amount of money justifiable and realistic for what this organisation would like to do? Is the amount of funding sought realistically going to be sufficient to deliver what they say it will? If your costs are on the higher side, make sure you explain why in your application. For example, if you're, again, people in head office may not always be really familiar with your community or your location. For example, if you're delivering in a remote area and transport costs are really high, say that in your budget. These travel costs are required to deliver in this community. Be really clear about why the costs are the way that they are. Now, include your staffing costs and make sure your wage expenses include everything. Superannuation, any planned wage increases, that's really important. Include the award rate in your budget too. If you need to include work cover, make sure you check your insurance policy, ensure you're budgeting the right amount for each trainee. Don't do too much guessing with your amounts because firstly, you might do yourself out of covering costs if you're guessing too much and you haven't really got evidence for the costs that you're asking for. You don't want to be guessing lower costs than what it's actually going to be. But at the same time, the funder will lose confidence in your budget, if they feel like some of it's just being guessed, they look at lots of applications. So they do get familiar with how much generally different things cost. So they don't want to be looking at your budget and thinking, oh, gee, I think this organisation's probably guessed a lot of this and I'm not sure if this budget is really realistic. So make sure your funder has confidence in your budget. Think about, when you're thinking about value for money and return on investment, think about how much your total program costs and how many people it's going to benefit. So how many people are you putting through the program? How significant are the benefits? Are the benefits going to the people the grant guidelines are targeting? Now, if you're in a remote community, it's justifiable that your program is going to be targeting fewer participants than some program in a more metro type area. So it really is about just communicating through your budget, justifying the costs and explaining to the assessor the costs that you've got in there. Now, something that a lot of organisations can get better at is communicating your in-kind support and resources. Make sure this goes again right back to when we were talking about assessing all of your organisation's assets and the value that you add to a project. Make sure you include all that in-kind support in your application, whether it's financial or other. The Volunteering if you're using volunteers in your project, the Volunteering Queensland website has a great volunteering hours calculator that can help you actually come up with a monetary value for the amount of volunteer hours that gets contributed to a project. I only learned about that recently. I think it's a really good thing to use if you're wanting to put it, kind of name how many hours are being donated. The other kinds of things that you could include in this is, if your organisation has a suitable meeting or training room, so you don't need to hire one, things like buses. If you have a catering crew or a cafe or someone down the road who has agreed to provide lunch or morning teas or something for your program participants, and you have that in a letter of support, make sure you kind of have some kind of value to that. Make sure you include that in-kind contribution in your program, because the assessor is really keen to see all the different contributions being made to the program. And of course, making sure it adds up. This happens more often than what you would think, that the total amount at the end, all the line items don't add up, although I do think the budget tool for this one does add it up for you. So that might not be a problem for you for this particular funding, but with other funding that you're applying for, making sure that your total amount does add up. So hopefully you get someone to proofread your writing, but you also get someone to proof your budget. Items not funded under this funding. So if you're applying for this one, it is expected to complement other programs and not duplicate already existing services or funding. Any third-party contributions must be specified in the project application to enable clear consideration of all funding, resources and in-kind support provided. Again, if you have had conversations with other organisations or companies, businesses who are happy to contribute things, make sure you get that in writing in a letter of support. Make sure you're including that in your in-kind costs. And any addition of resources of subcontracting post-project approval must be approved in writing by the department. So funds cannot be used to purchase assets or capital equipment, like you can't be buying new computers or a building or vehicles. It doesn't pay for interstate travel, training or conferences for project staff. It doesn't pay for recurring costs such as established positions within the organisation or core functions of the organisation. And you can't pay for an allowance for participants to attend the program, but you can pay for things like help with transport or bus fares and that kind of thing. Any questions about eligible costs? Any ideas that you had and you just want to check that that would be an eligible cost? Okay, I'm going to move on to the budget tool, which again, this will be sent to you. this grant actually has a budget tool to help you create your budget. This one here is kind of a summarized version of that, and we will send it through to you to have a look at. It is really important that you go through this fairly thoroughly to make sure you've thought of everything. One quick tip is to make sure all your figures are to be rounded. There's no cents. So the amounts in cost and breakdown notes must match the state. Must match. Sorry, my words I'm losing them. Must match the specific awards that you're paying people under, and confirm number of hours and how many weeks each staff member will be paid over the course of the project. And make sure you do factor in the award rate increases and on costs like superannuation and work cover. Don't include organisation or recurrent wages or established positions. You can apportion a percentage towards existing staff wages if they have a direct role during the project delivery period. So just thinking about that, the wages cannot be paying for established roles in your organisation, although you can, a certain percentage you can apportion towards existing staff who will be either overseeing the project in some way or contributing some way to the project. But you can't be using the funds to just pay for wages for people who aren't directly involved. State an amount for each item or expense and apportion costs directly in association with the project delivery. Don't include routine operational expenses such as the purchase or upgrade of software. You can't be paying for your rent or any of that overseas or interstate travel for project staff or participants. Now, for the training costs, state the costs associated with any specific research, training or resources, assessment materials, product design, etc. as part of the project. State the participant student contribution fee for accredited training subsidised by the Queensland Government. Include the name of the qualification and make sure it's the right qualification. We did have a discussion in Strathpine on Monday about an application that was received where I think the organisation must have been applying for a couple of different projects, and the budget that they had submitted with this application was actually talking about a totally different qualification that didn't match the actual assessment criteria questions that the organisation had answered. So again, making sure you've got the right one in your application and that you have been specific about what qualification you're delivering. Don't include items that should be provided by the RTO or non-accredited or fee-for-service training providers like stationery for training or textbooks or assessment workbooks, or training or conference fees for project staff. And again, not including assets or capital equipment purchases, office furniture, vehicles, smartphones, tablets, computers or laptops, printers, photocopiers, all of that kind of thing. Although one quick note about that is that it may be acceptable to purchase second-hand laptops or computers if the cost is lower than leasing or hiring those things and you need them for the project. So to summarise here, the common pitfalls, the common things that we see organisations doing when they're writing their application for any funding is that they don't address the assessment criteria. They spend time or words writing about things that they would like to talk about, but they don't actually specifically address the assessment criteria, or they fail to answer all of them. They skip over some of them. A poor project summary, so not clearly articulating your project idea, and the assessor has to read it several times to figure out what it is that you're actually wanting to deliver. Not demonstrating local knowledge or understanding of your cohort. This is really important. The funder needs to be very confident that there is a need in your community for your project and that you really deeply understand that cohort and that need. The next pitfall is cutting and pasting. This happens a lot, particularly for organisations who apply again and again for particular funding, like it becomes quite routine for them to apply for specific funding. But often there's more effort involved in editing to make it relevant than if you had just started from scratch. Be really wary of cutting and pasting without targeting the information to the current project or the funding application. This is where you can fall into the trap of using old data instead of checking that you're using the most up-to-date data. Just accidentally naming the wrong. There are often things that have changed from one funding round to the next. even slight changes you might miss if you're copying and pasting rather than writing it from scratch again. Definitely use old applications or previous applications as a starting point to refer to, but I would advise against cutting and pasting if you can. I'm in a budget with no detail or incorrect numbers. Remember, your assessor wants to feel really confident about what it is that they're funding. They want to be really clear about the detail in your budget. And look, I think having a detailed budget really serves your organisation well as well. So not only is that something the assessor wants to see, but if you have had staff turnover in your organisation before, you may have had the experience of kind of inheriting a project from someone who's left the organisation. Gee, it can get really confusing when there's not a detailed budget. When budgets are vague and you have to kind of inherit a project partway through, you don't really know exactly what it was that they're wanting to pay for out of different aspects of the budget. You don't know what's already been paid for and how much you've got left. It can get a bit messy. So I think having a detailed budget not only gives confidence to the funder, but it is really genuinely helpful for your organisation to be clear about what it is that you're paying for. Okay, we're really getting close to the end. Thanks for sticking with me. The last before submitting, the last bit really is editing, proofreading and triple checking. And often by the time you get to this stage, it's probably the day that it's due, realistically, isn't it? And you might be in a bit of a rush to try and get it in. Make sure if you can, you allocate some time for proofreading and checking that you've got all your attachments. And if at all possible, get someone else to proofread it, not you, because our brains are very, very clever. We often do not pick up on edits that need to be made because we know what we intended to say, so our brain will skip over errors. We've got a few tips in here. Now, just to, I'm giving you a little test here. On this slide, there is an error. So we're talking about proofreading here. If you can tell me where the error is, I don't have a prize for you, sorry, but you'll gain the respect and admiration of your peers online and of me. Let me know if you find the mistake. So funders often read a huge volume of applications and will only have time to initially skim the application before looking for all the relevant information. Your response needs to be very clearly written. Mapping your writing will help with writing with clarity, so please do that, but also take on board some of these tips that we have here. So don't use jargon, don't try and use fancy words, keep it simple, keep it clear, avoid unnecessary words like actually, seemingly, very, very, hard to write grant application. It's really important that you cut out all those unnecessary words, not only for it to be clear for the reader, but so that you don't waste words when you've got a word count that you're trying to stick within. These words that don't add value, like really, basically, actually, we aim to, all of those things could be said in a different way. Be concise. Less is more, but make sure it's enough. Use your best examples, not all of your examples. Just use your most relevant ones. Use acronyms and abbreviations wisely, so you can say the full name and then use brackets afterwards and use the acronym. But remember, don't use lots of acronyms and abbreviations that your sector or your industry might be really familiar with, because the assessor possibly has not worked in that sector before and might not know what all those acronyms mean. Definitely avoid irrelevant examples, even if they're a good example of work. If they're not relevant to the funding opportunity, don't use them. Now, did anyone find the mistake? Should you lose words that don't add value, or should you loose words that don't add value? Hopefully some of you picked up on that. That's just a little, that's just something to keep you on your toes when you're listening to, when we're nearly to the end of this presentation. Okay, we should lose words that don't add value, not loose words that don't add value. But this is a really good example. This is a good example of where if you've written something and you've gone over it many times, you often won't see it. You won't see it, and someone else will pick up on it. So if you can, get someone else to proofread your application before you submit. Answer all the questions. make sure the key message is there, use examples, provide supporting material, mirror the language of the funder. So if they're using words in their funding package or materials, like their funding guidelines, like innovative, collaborative, partnerships, that kind of thing, make sure you're using similar language in your application. Link to the requirements, focus on the benefits of your program. Don't make unclear statements or make statements that are not supported by anything. So make sure you've got something to back up what you're saying, and don't submit an application without examples. It's really important that you have examples in there. Now, again, it's really difficult to pick up on any mistakes or unclear messages because you know what you're talking about and what you're trying to get across. Let someone else have a read through it, and preferably someone who has not been involved in the actual process of designing the program. So if you do have a team that's more than a couple of people, it would be great to get someone in the organisation who has not been part of writing the application to read your application. So the proofreader should be looking out for two things. They're looking out for little things like spelling errors, grammar, punctuation, but they should also be looking out for clarity. Does this make sense? Like, do they, as someone who hasn't been involved in this process at all, understand what your project is and what you're trying to say? Because if they can't understand it, it's unlikely that the assessor will. So get someone, hopefully the day before you're actually submitting this, to read through it for clarity, but also for typos and spelling, that kind of thing. If you can't get another person to do that for you, the next best option could be using an app. Now, there are two apps that we suggest, and there's probably more out there, but the two that we have used before and suggest are either Hemingway or Grammarly. Now, these apps, you can copy and paste your text into them, and they will give you suggestions on how to improve the writing. So they'll let you know if there's a spelling error or a grammar error or ways that you might be able to make the language more concise. But, you know, a word of caution, these are apps, not people. They probably won't be able to give you good feedback on the clarity of the message. So it is best, if you possibly can, to get a person to proofread your application. So this is your checklist. This is on the back of the plan on a paid resource that we'll send to you. Have you talked to your people about your project? Have you done your project plan? Have you got quotes? Have you got a training support plan template? Have you included evidence on verifying the in-kind contributions? Have you got resumes attached if you need those? Financial statements, letters of support. These are all the kinds of things that you need to have ready to actually submit on the day. As you can see, it's absolutely not as simple as just logging onto the portal on the day and putting in your answers. There are quite a few things that need to be done beforehand, which is why it's great to be doing this today in early December. So you've got some time before the 22nd of Feb to get that sorted. And then you breathe out, you reflect. You go, oh boy, I'm glad that's finished, until next time, and ask for feedback. Even if you're successful or you aren't successful, ask for feedback. Feedback about your application is such a valuable thing to have in hand for the next time you write an application. And you know what things were really strong and what things you should put in there again next time, and you know what things you need to improve for next time. It's really important as far as acquittal goes to prepare early. So if you do, you are successful, and I hope you are, and you do get funding, make sure you do prepare early for your acquittal. Track your data, make sure you keep on top of those monthly reports, document everything, save everything in a shared accessible drive or network, just to make sure, you know, if you're unwell or if you're not there at the end of the project, that someone else has access to all the things that they need. Okay. And again, asking for feedback. And before you sign on that dotted line, making sure you're really clear about that service agreement. You're clear about everything that your organisation needs to do. Do you need to be creating a new bank account for the project? What are some things that you need to put in place and have there ready to go your project kicks off. Are there any questions that anyone would like to ask at this point? We've got just a few minutes together before we close up, so I just want to have a couple of minutes spare to ask any questions or have any of the Pippos or Trin make comments. Is there anything that you want to reiterate or add to what's been said?
I think you've covered it all really well. Well, from my perspective anyway. Thank you, Stacey.
Thank you very much. I feel like I've been talking for a long time, which I have. So credit to everyone who's stayed on to listen to all of it. We will be in touch with lots of materials afterwards. But please reach out to your Pippo. Please chat to the funder. Really hoping that many of you are successful. I'm really excited about, I always love seeing the projects that come out of these funding rounds, seeing the successful projects. I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out of it. I'm just having a scan through the chat to make sure there's nothing here that I need to, I'm sure Cassie's probably been onto some of these things, answering already.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, there's a couple of notes in there and a couple of questions, or that may lead into other questions that we may not have addressed through this presentation, but we do have that and we'll reach out, just around some of the points that were made in the chat, if we can, Trin, and we'll work out which one of the Pippos is best placed to have a chat with your organisation about those things. That's okay?
All right.
Sorry, I've got to go off mute. Yes, I've just answered one question about the funding, but if I've missed any others, I'll look through them and answer them.
If we missed you, we will come back to you. We comb over and over again, and if not, call us.
Definitely, or email.
Thank you so much, and thanks for being here, Trin and Pippos, for your contributions too. It's been I'm really glad to see in the comments that the tips here today will be useful to you, even if it's not for, if you're applying for this funding or anything else in the future. I hope that this is relevant to you and you can use some of this in your applications. So thank you very much. Now, when we send out the post-event email with all those things in it, we'll also have a little feedback survey. Please let us know how you found it, because we'd really like to know how we can improve it for next time and what things you might like to know more about. Thanks, everyone. Look, 2 minutes early, giving you 2 minutes back in your day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stacey, and
Enjoy
everyone else.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Enjoy your day. Bye.